Just to pick up on a couple of points that were discussed. So when they were talking about this possibility of a binary sum, these were the main candidates that scientists are basically willing to at least discuss or entertain the idea. So it might not be something visible, so that's why we haven't found it yet. There's obviously a lot of space out there, and it takes the astronomers a long time to cover it. But one of these subjects that documentary doesn't go into too much discussion about, which is the connection between the great year and consciousness, is something that we discuss at length in these conferences that we run in California. So when you're in that golden age and you're near this second sun, much like our sun changes the length of day and the waking of the plants and obviously the animals, and we have a lot less light in the winter, so the animals hibernate in the winter time. And then in the summer, when we've got more warmth from the sun, obviously life springs up and comes alive. So the argument is, when we're getting near to this other object out there, it also has this stimulating effect, and so we've perhaps moved to this higher level of consciousness that I would argue has more of a heart-based ability to it, and so we can live in these higher qualities of empathy and love and the kind of things that we all have inside us, but we don't often see reflected around us in the world. So that's kind of where he was going. He didn't really want to discuss the subjects of consciousness in the documentary too much. But enough time has passed since the documentary was made, 2004, that we can at least say, okay, well, has anything else come up since that time to back up this theory or to undermine the theory? So one of the first things that happened soon afterwards, in about 2005, there's a good Wikipedia page about this, Gravity Probe B was launched by NASA, and Walter Cruttenden, who made the Great Year documentary, who lives in California, knew that they were launching this satellite. The program was run at Stanford, and what they were doing was, because they think the precession of the equinox is controlled by the wobble of the Earth, if they launch a satellite outside of the Earth, they don't see the precession of the equinox anymore. So they launched this Gravity Probe B, and Walter wrote to them because, of course, in his theory, they're still going to see the precession of the equinox, and they pick it up as noise. That's how they measure it with a satellite. So he wrote to Stanford and he said, well, I know you're about to launch this satellite. I think you're going to be disappointed with the results, and you're still going to see this noise generated by the stars moving, because it's not generated by the wobble of the Earth. It's generated by this cycle through the cosmos. So we didn't hear anything for 2 years. And then Stanford got in touch with him and invited him up from Los Angeles to Stanford. And he thought it was just to show him around the campus. So we ended up in a room with a board of the guys that were running this Gravity Probe B project. And they said to him, how did you know what we were going to see before we even launched the satellite? Because it's actually classified as a failure. You can look at the Wikipedia page, because the satellite didn't cancel out the effects of the precession, so they think there's something wrong with the satellite. But as far as Walter's concerned, they spent $750 million to launch this satellite, and they've given him more proof for his theory that we're in this binary system. So he got into a conversation with these guys at Stanford, and they discussed his idea about this binary system, and again they were willing to entertain the idea that there might be something that we're revolving around that's causing precession. So that was then. And then this takes us up to the beginning of last year, and it's a big announcement. So Caltech are now saying that there is something out in space, something with a mass. At the moment, the theory is it's 10 times the Earth, and it's on some kind of cycle between 10 and 20,000 years, and so it is coming in. So now they're looking for something out there, and it's funny that they've come up with this maximum of 20,000, because we're almost getting into his 24,000 year cycle. So, and they're not the only ones. There have been a few announcements. They're finding more and more of these objects, small planetary objects, and this one obviously looks a lot bigger. So that's basically where we're at. Scientists are now heavily looking for for some object, and there's probably going to be more announcements to come. So instead of undermining the theory, Walter's position is actually much stronger now. So that's kind of one side of it. But there is more evidence that wasn't covered in the documentary. And this one, Göbekli Tepe, it's in southern Turkey, down near the Syrian border. Otherwise, I would have, if it wasn't in that part of the world, I'd have gone there with Olga in the past couple of years. But it's got a little bit warm with things coming over the border. Not that far from this site. But it's been carbon dated to 9,500 BCE. This Karl Schmidt, German archaeologist, and I can provide links for all this stuff. And it's actually on one of my websites. I'll give you in a minute. But this site basically changes the history that we were told at school, because it shows a lot of hallmarks of what we considered civilization, because it needed a lot of planning. And much to my disappointment, this is a 25-acre site. They've been excavating it for up to about 20 years now, and they've only excavated 5% of the site. But this actually does rewrite the history books. They haven't got round to it yet, but it does change the whole picture that we were taught at school about our history and how civilization developed. And you can see Ian Hodder says it basically changes everything, just this site in southern Turkey. Because the amount of engineering, they're moving these 20, up to 20 tons, some of these megaliths, so you're talking about Stonehenge kind of weights getting up there. You can see the art on that pillar there of the fox, and it's got a lot of different figures, so there was very developed artwork. And if you've got people doing the construction, then you've got to have other people gathering food. So it just shows this much greater sophistication. And it does look like there was engineers and all these kind of skills that weren't supposed to develop for another 6,000 or so years. So that's one. The most recent one, and I know this is a geologist at Boston University, Dr. Robert Schock. We did a tour in Egypt together. So this is kind of just emerged in the last couple of years. And there's a lot of resistance to some of these sites that are being dated to very early ages, because of course you've got to go through official channels, university funding for the dig, and it needs to be approved at sort of governmental level. So this Dr. Danny Hillman had a lot of problems just getting the sign off. There was opposition from different people, but finally he got the authorisation. And now they've started to find some dates that are going back into this 12,000 years ago. So you're back into the last ice age kind of time period. So it's emerging all the time now. We are finding these sites that are pushing the data back. Something that brought Dr. Robert Schock there to worldwide renown was that he was the geologist that was credited with redating the Sphinx. And so the way that one of the tests that they do is they hit the ground, the bedrock with a sledgehammer, and then you get you can see underneath the ground, so you can start to see erosion, how long it's been exposed to the elements around the Sphinx. And what he really zoomed in on, and it's called The Mystery of the Sphinx. It's free on YouTube. Charlton Heston hosted it, and I think it's been watched by about 250 million people at this point, because they looked at this water erosion that's found around the Sphinx. So you see on the top right, wind erosion comes across and the rain erosion comes down. Well, the erosion around the Sphinx is coming down, as you can see in this picture. That's a photograph of the Sphinx in closure bottom left. So I've looked at that with Dr. Robert Schock on site. So it's fairly well accepted. The geologist who knows his erosion looks at the photograph, he'll say it's rain erosion, and they did that at a big geology panel in the US. So it made front page news around the world. This was, I think, late 90s. It's like geologists are obviously looking at it very differently to the Egyptologists. Because if it's rain erosion, then it pushes it back to a time before the Sahara was a dry desert. So it was still temperate, and they know roughly when that was, and it was about 8 or 9,000 BC when it was still raining and precipitation was present. So there's a lot of these kind of smoking guns that really seem to point to us missing something.
Is the Grand Canyon like that? where someone once believed it that submerged.
The Grand Canyon's a lot deeper. It's about a mile deep.
Yeah. There was something I read once where they said, oh, they found something similar, like fish's bones and fossils and that. So they thought at one point.
Yes, yeah, it was underwater at one point. Yeah, that's right. And there's, you can see a lot of different things like that. This was the boat that they kind of flashed past, the solar boat, as they called it in the Great Year. But this was actually found buried outside the Great Pyramid. So there's massive trenches, and it was like a Meccano kit. So they took it all apart, put all the bits, and then covered it over with blocks about as wide as this room is, massive blocks. So when they pulled up these blocks, they found this boat and they put it back together. So you can see it now if you go to the Great Pyramid. It's there. And some, I think, Norwegians seamen looked at it, and it has actually got some damage as if it's been on the sea or hit coral or something. Because the argument is it was just used for the Nile. But it does look like maybe if they built the sides up a bit higher, you might be able to cross oceans. But the Egyptians did actually invent the sail, so quite adept. So I kind of got in to this subject because when I started looking at human history and human origins, I realised that there was actually a lot of questions, and so it led to me travelling between 100 and 200,000 miles to a lot of these ancient sites, particularly South Central America. Done 7 tours, hosting tours in Egypt for 2 weeks in the last few years, with a lot of these big authors that you'd see on the History and Discovery Channel, people that have had their own shows. Graham Hancock had the show The Lost Civilization on Channel 4. So these guys I was in Egypt with, looking at these things on the ground and questioning them to my heart's content. Like Dr. Robert Schoch. I think one of the first things I said to him was, tell me everything you know. I generally open with that, and then we kind of go from there. So before all my travels, I created this website, which is still up, atlantisevidence.com. People think of lost civilization. Atlantis is this image or name that comes into mind. And just something as food for thought, because Solon, who was a ancient Greek, he's the only person that actually ever spoke about Atlantis, and the story came down from him, and it was supposed to have been given to him by a priest in the Egyptian temples. And that priest possibly gives us an idea of what's happened. Why don't we know about this ancient wisdom? And so the main message about it was that there have been many destructions of mankind, arising, leaving only those of you who are destitute of letters and education. So in the first place, you only remember a single deluge, because in the myths, and of course, the famous Bible stories, you do not know that there formerly dwelt in your land the fairest and noblest of races, and he's talking to the Greeks. And it's over 9,000 years ago that your civilization, so at this point the Greeks didn't even know their own history, and it had been recorded in Egypt. But what might have happened is now, because we live near the sea or on rivers, and there's lots of benefits of living in those places, but if a flood does happen dramatically, and it could have been kind of localised to the Mediterranean, I mean that's the central point of the known world for us at this point in time. So these people on the lowlands who are perhaps more educated, and you've got the sort of more, what should we say, less sophisticated people living up in the hills, perhaps shepherds or something, the people that couldn't write, well maybe they're the ones that survived these deluges, and that's how it's all been wiped out somehow. But one of my pet peeves is what happened in the Library of Alexandria, and that's where a lot of the records went, because it was the centre of the known world, a big port. So anytime a ship came into Alexandria and it had a book on board, they took the book, it went into the library, they took a copy and they gave the copy to the ship. And so all of our records were being stored there. And then of course it was burnt to smithereens. So when we're trying to peer back into these myths of time, unfortunately a lot of it went up in smoke. So I travelled around a bit. This is Patricia and Yusuf in the bottom right. That's the view from their flat. They just view straight onto the Giza Plateau. So we've spent many well, sometimes a little glass of wine after a successful tour. And so I've done a lot of tours with them in Egypt, and I'll tell you about what they've shown me. In the bottom left is Brian Forster, who's kind of one of the History Channel's Peruvian experts. So I've run quite a few tours with him. And up in the top is Graham Hancock and Robert Baval, who have written a number of bestsellers on these subjects. And there's been, so up in the top right, I was out in the snow, that's over in Wiltshire. So any conditions, I'm out there trying to work out what's going on at these ancient sites.